Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Firstly, just apologies. I'm so sorry that I cannot make it for this evening. So this is why we've had to do the recording early. And I acknowledge that some of you might miss out on the opportunity to ask questions, but if there are any questions that you do have after the presentation, and even when watching it later, please do submit the questions to Muslims Connected, and I'll do my best to get a response to the questions. So as the last week of the Understanding Depression series, we're going to focus on emotion regulation and coping strategies for depression. So what we'll cover, we'll look at interrupting the cycle of depression. We'll look at behavioral activation, which is one of the key ways of regulating emotions for depression. We'll speak about activities. What does that mean? How does that fit into the scheme of things? We'll speak a little bit about analyzing thinking and identifying unhelpful thinking and then staying healthy. You've probably would have noticed by now that there's a big part of maintaining mental health is being proactive. And this incorporates, putting things in place in your life that helps you to manage stress when it does come. So firstly, if you're thinking, if we look at depression, it's a cycle, right? So, and the thing about depression is the mood becomes quite low, and there's a lack of energy, there's a lack of motivation, and so when there's a depression, again, if you remember the symptoms that we spoke about, the key symptoms of depression is the low mood, it is the lack of motivation, the lack of interest in previous activities and things like that. And so there's low energy, there's fatigue, there's a lack of interest. And because of all of this, there's decreased activity, and there's also impairment or neglect of the usual daily functioning. This, of course, leads to guilt because you're not doing the things that you used to do or that you need to do, feelings of hopelessness, and then also feelings of ineffectiveness in the life, which just, again, increases the depression. So it becomes a cycle that you get stuck in, because of course when your activity level decreases, you do become less motivated and more lethargic, and this of course is what influences you not doing the things that you usually do. So not just activities that you usually engage in, hobbies and sports and things like that, but even just your daily chores. Everything becomes difficult. It becomes difficult to get out of bed in the morning. It becomes difficult to cook the food. It becomes difficult to clean the house. It becomes difficult to take care of myself or to, connect with people. So all of those tasks and things that you usually do, it becomes difficult to do that because when we engage in activities and so on, it does give us the motivation to do those things. And so because of the mood component of depression, we don't have the energy to do those things, and that just increases the depressive symptoms, right? And so, of course, because there's a lack of motivation, there's a lack of energy, and it's also a lack of interest, one starts to feel overwhelmed because then tasks also start to pile up. And because we don't have the energy to do it, there's just things piling up and we're not getting to it. And this, again, of course, has a negative influence on how we experience it. And this is what also contributes to those feelings of guilt and hopelessness. Right. So what we want to do is we want to reverse the cycle of depression, and how we do this is by increasing the activity. And activity doesn't just mean exercise. It means increasing activities in our daily functioning, that either hobbies that we usually do, either sports that we do, either exercise or social connections, or any kind of activity that will help us towards feeling, towards feeling motivated, towards feeling, getting an improved mood, towards being more active and having more energy and things like that. And so when there's an increased activity, it helps you to feel because the thing with activities, again, we want to be doing activities that we enjoy. So this is not just exercise, it's not just sports, it's any kind of activity that we do that usually brings us joy. So things that we enjoy doing. So if you are someone who likes taking a walk on the beach with a friend, then that is what you can do. If you are someone who likes reading, then that's what you can do. If you're someone who likes gardening, then that is what you can do. If you are someone who likes being in the outdoors, then you could, take a walk, you could, go run. It really depends on what are the kind of activities that you usually do. And so those are the things that you would do. Right? So it must be things that you're used to doing, that you've done before. You don't want to be doing things or activities that is going to be difficult for you. So if you're not a runner, you're not going to go run, you might take a walk, right? So you want to do things that you really enjoy because it's going to improve your mood. And by the mood being improved, we start feeling hopeful and confident. We feel less guilty. So our mood is improved, but also our functioning then improves. And this, of course, when you're doing activities, which includes activities that facilitate movement, this helps bring our energy up. It increases our motivation. And so because there's an increased energy and increased motivation, again, it contributes to continuing with the increased activity. So when we're looking at activities, when we're looking at activities, the activities, it helps us to overcome or just to help manage the emotions or the mood of the depression. Of course, if it's a severe depression, we have spoken about medication management, and there are some cases where you actually have to have a referral to a psychiatrist or GP that will help with medication that works alongside the therapy in terms of alleviating the symptoms. But for milder forms of depression and also alongside medication, we look at what is called behavioral activation, which is one of the key things that one uses when you're working with depression. And really that increasing that activity level helps a lot with the management of the mood. So this is when we talk about the emotional regulation within depression, we speak about behavioral activation. It's to activate the self. And as I mentioned, it's not just doing exercise or anything like that. It's really activating ourselves in like lots of different arenas. And of course, when you are active, when you become more active, there's a lot of advantages. You start to feel better because when you are engaging in any kind of activity, you are now focusing on something else. So of course, when you're feeling depressed, there might be certain things that your mind becomes focused on. You might be ruminating. Ruminating is thinking excessively about things. And this, obviously, this tends to take us deeper into our depression. But when we are busy with activities, when we are activating ourselves, then we will feel better because we are engaging in an activity that's taking our mind away from the focus that it has, which is on the negative. Right? So there's a different focus. And then with time, this can help us, give a sense of hope because we'll feel like we're moving forward. Because now we are doing things, we are doing something. So we're not just, the depression, it brings the mood so low that you just don't do anything. You don't feel like doing anything, or it's difficult to do anything, right? And so when you're engaging in activities, there's movement, right? So you're moving, so it feels like I'm moving forward. It feels like I'm starting to take control of my life because now I'm actually doing something. And this helps with experiencing a sense of mastery. Right? When we speak about a sense of mastery, it's that we feel like we're taking control of our life, mastering our life, right? And so when we're busy with behavioral activation and we're doing activities, then this helps us feel like we are gaining a sense of mastery. And of course, depending on the activities that you do, and this is why I mentioned that when we do activities, we need to make sure that we are doing activities that we enjoy, things that bring us joy, things that we like, things that bring us pleasure. So if you're someone who likes reading, if you're someone who has hobbies, maybe you like art, maybe you like painting, maybe you like drawing, maybe you like sculpting. You want to do things that you really enjoy because that will help you also to bring pleasure, so that will help lift the mood, because in the depression the mood is low, and so what you want to do is you want to lift the mood, and so we do this through the use of activities. And of course, when you're very busy and you're physically tired, you need a rest. But when you're in a depression, the opposite is true. If you are in a depression, the more you sleep and the more you do nothing, it worsens the depression. It feeds the depression. And so you don't want that. You start to feel lethargic, you start to feel tired, and then it just becomes more and more difficult to activate yourself and to get yourself to do things. So what you want to do when you are in a depression and when you activate yourself, it helps because now you are doing something, and because you're doing activities, it's actually it gives you energy. And we know this, that when there's movement, we become more energetic, right? And also again, because you have more energy, more motivation, you then doing more and more things all the time, which leaves less and less room to ruminate and to spiral deeper into the depression. Also, so you'll feel better, you'll be less tired, and you'll be able to think a bit clearer. Right? Once you get started on activities, again, because you're engaging in activities, you might start to look at things differently. You might gain different perspectives, because when you're in the depression or when you're ruminating, you're focusing only on one perspective. You're only seeing things from one angle, and it's very difficult to see things from a different angle. But once you activate yourself and you start engaging with people and engaging in activities, you might give yourself the opportunity and the space to start to think differently and to gain a different perspective on whatever the issue is. And so your thoughts may become clearer because now you are activating yourself, you have more energy, and so you have a better headspace in which to think. And so this helps you to think clearer. But it's very important that, as I mentioned, that when you do activities, when you choose activities, and later on I'll show you some examples of what you can do. But of course, your list is your own. You can really think about things that work for you. So, and it is very important that you do think about things that work for you. I mean, it's no use. I can suggest things to you, but it is important that at the end of the day, when you think about activities that's going to help you, to activate yourself, that you think about things that you will enjoy. I can't tell you to, for example, to go for boxing, because you might not enjoy that, right? And then it becomes actually more of a challenge, as opposed to it being something that you can enjoy, that can bring you pleasure. So when you choose activities, be sure to choose things that you do enjoy, so that you can also, it doesn't only give you motivation, it doesn't only give you energy, but it also brings some pleasure, so that you enjoy the things that you're doing. And this, again, this helps you with positive feelings. And of course, when we have positive feelings, then again, it works towards our motivation. But it is important that when you are doing behavioral activation, when you're trying to activate yourself, is that you start simple, right? You don't want to also bombard yourself. You don't want to overwhelm yourself. You want to start simple with gradual steps. So there's obviously, like I mentioned, there's a lot of advantages in increasing your activity level. Besides the hormones that are being released, that also give us energy. It's not always easy to get started. And sometimes, and especially in a depression, our thoughts tend to be negative. So we might think that I'm not going to get it right. I won't enjoy it. It's going to be too difficult for me, or I'm going to fail at it, and I just won't be able to do it, right? So there might be those kind of thoughts that are running around in our head, right? So when you are trying to activate yourself, be sure to start off simply. So let's say you are someone that used to belong to a walking club, and you walk 5 times for the week, right? For an hour. Then you want to start simple. And if you want to get back into it, you can say, okay, I'm going to start off with 2 days for the week. So look at what is most manageable. I'm going to start off with 2 days for the week, and I'm only going to go for half an hour, right? And so you start simple, and you gradually then build yourself up to the routine that you used to have before. Because remember, one of the symptoms of depression is fatigue and low energy. And so it's not just that you don't want to do things, it's that there really isn't energy or motivation to do things. And so you have to slowly build that motivation and build that energy again. And if you're going to try and start start off with a bang, it might be difficult to sustain that. So this is why you want to start simply and start it in gradual steps, so that you can build yourself up to a point where you can feel like it's something that you can manage and something sustainable. Right? So small steps and set manageable targets. Again, remember the sense of mastery we spoke about. When you are activating yourself, you want to work towards gaining mastery. And if you're going to set targets that are beyond your reach, it's not going to keep you motivated. It's going to have the opposite effect. It's going to demotivate you. So you want to set targets that are manageable, that are reachable, and that are practical, so that you can actually get there. This helps with a sense of mastery. And when I feel like I've mastered, when I feel like I've achieved, then I have the motivation that builds motivation to continue. And that's what we want. And so I always say to my clients, slow progress is good progress, because this is the progress that one can maintain, that one can sustain. You want to move slowly so that you can hold on to that, not to move too fast and then it's difficult to maintain it. And then again, when you don't follow through, you feel demotivated and it just, it sends you into a spiral again. So you want to start simple. You want to move with gradual steps to get to where you want to be. You want to set manageable targets and manageable and reachable goals for yourself so that you can get there. And then once you're in it, you can start building towards the routine again, into a routine that you want. So let's say with the example, we said maybe you used to walk 5 days a week for an hour each. Starting off with 2 days a week, half an hour each, it's fine. And then once you've got that going and once you're able to maintain that, now you add perhaps another day. And then as you continue, you add another half an hour, and then you can add another day until you're reaching the point where the routine that you want, which is the 5 days a week for an hour each. Right? So you're working slowly towards getting them. Similarly, if you're someone who likes to read, you could try, instead of, because if you think about it, when you have no motivation and you think about, okay, I know I usually enjoy reading a book, but just the thought of having to complete the whole book feels overwhelming at this point in time. So then tell yourself, I'm going to read a chapter, or I'm going to read a page, or I'm going to read for 5 minutes. And once you've gotten that going, once each day you just spend 5 minutes reading, or you spend each day just reading one chapter. And once you feel like you are able to manage that, then you can start increasing it, right? Then you increase it slowly so that you can maintain what the target that you've set, and eventually until you reach the routine that you want. So some of the activities that we can do, I've added this because I think it's nice. It's called Coping Skills Bingo. It's different things that you can do, right? So maybe you want to, getting away from the problem is taking a break, taking a time out. Sometimes, like, for example, you're sitting with your, I know the matrics are busy with preparing for the exams now. Sometimes you're sitting and studying, and then you just feel stuck. You just feel like you're struggling with something, and it's difficult to get past it. And sometimes getting up, taking a walk and taking a break from it and coming back helps give you a different perspective and helps give you the space to refocus and then, and move on. You can play a game. You can take 10 deep breaths. If some of you have attended the Understanding Anxiety, you'll know that we spoke about deep breathing, which is very helpful, to kind of just to help us just switch off from whatever's going on and to give us that transition space to move into a better space. You can go for a walk, you can exercise, you can do yoga, make a playlist. I mean, for us as Muslims, we can listen to, recitation from the Quran, you can listen to dhikr. If you do like music, you can also, if you like listening to instrumental music, anything that helps you put you in a good mood, you can listen to it. You get these, I know we can access really anything now online. So I know on YouTube also they have these videos of white noise, like the waves of the ocean or waterfalls and things like that. It sometimes also helps to listen to those kind of things. We can perhaps watch a movie, enjoy nature. So go for a walk at the beach, perform a random act of kindness. This also makes us feel good. Say positive affirmations to ourselves. We can try and figure out and understand how we're feeling, or what's happening for us. We can connect socially with friends or with loved ones or people that we feel close to, and just to connect to people. And sometimes being in that kind of space with the social connections, it does help. Take care of yourself, and this of course can also take many forms. Make yourself a cup of tea, you can read a book, so there are different things that one can do to just in that moment when you need to cope with something. So on the one hand, we're talking about emotion regulation, and because the main emotion in depression is the low mood, we want to do things that is going to lift the mood, right? Because the mood is low, so we want to lift the mood. And so this is what we do when we talk about behavioral activation. And behavioral activation, it can include an array of things, any kinds of activities that will help us just be activated. So doing things, right? It doesn't only mean exercise. Like I said, it can be connecting with friends. It can be reading a book. It can be going for a walk. It can be exercising. It can be running. It can be anything that, any activity that you enjoy, that brings you joy, but also an activity that gets you up and doing something, right? And then on the flip side of that, we talk about coping skills. And so coping skills are used when, when there's an emotion and there's a situation that we really have no control over. So we learn how to cope with that, right? And this is when we talk about the coping skills. And so these things are things, again, it's also things that we will enjoy doing, and it takes us away from the problem in that moment. But it gives us the capacity to deal with whatever the stress is. So we will always have stress in our life, but it becomes distress if we cannot manage, right? And so when we do things that we enjoy, when we do things that help us cope, it gives us that capacity to deal with the things that we have in our life that are difficult. Some other things that you can do, have a laugh. I know often when I have a tough week, or when I've had, I have a very busy schedule, and when I've had a very tough week, I like to watch comedy. I like to watch things that make me laugh, because it's my way of releasing from from a challenging week or from a busy week. Learn something new, play board games, get some rest. Sometimes we find it challenging to deal with certain problems in our life or certain challenges, and we don't realize that sometimes we just need enough rest. We're not getting enough rest. So there's a lot of things that can also affect how we deal with things, and we'll get to that in the end when we talk about staying healthy. But getting enough sleep is something that is very, very important. And for many of us with our busy schedules, we often don't get enough sleep, but it is important to get enough rest, because when you don't sleep well and when you are tired, it actually affects so many other things. It affects your ability to concentrate. And when I'm not concentrating, then again, I can feel demotivated. It affects your energy levels, right? It affects and then that has a knock-on effect on you being able to deal with your day or get through your day or things like that. So sometimes it's not a simple thing, but sometimes we need rest, or we need to be eating better, or we need to be, taking breaks in between, because we haven't had any breaks. So I don't know if anyone ever experiences, but sometimes when you're tired, when you're really, really tired, then you feel quite irritable, and that irritability, it just comes out in everything that we're doing or how we're managing things. And sometimes we wonder, why am I feeling so irritable? And it's because I haven't been sleeping well and I didn't have enough rest. And so I don't feel like I can deal with my day. I don't feel like I can do the things I need to do, right? So obviously when depression is diagnosed, there's a treatment which would include behavioral activation, which might include medication and talk therapy and those things. But also these things can help us to manage stress and problems and challenges in our lives, so that it doesn't become overwhelming to the point where it actually takes us away from our functioning altogether. That is when our problems or our challenges, it impairs our ability to function in our life. That's when it is a diagnosable condition. And just as a proactive way of keeping ourselves healthy enough to deal with our challenges in life, these things are important to include in our daily life. So to check, I see there's a I want to just check if there's a question or something. So the question is whether I'm able to diagnose mental health conditions. Yes, so psychologists are able to diagnose mental health conditions. That's part of what we do. We diagnose and we treat mental health conditions. Sometimes you can treat a mental health condition without medication, and sometimes you do. And even so, even if you're using medication, even if medication is indicated, then the person will be referred additionally to a psychiatrist or a GP for medication management, but the psychologist will be the one treating the condition from a psychological perspective, which is either through talk therapy or through cognitive behavioral therapy, which is more, working with behavioral activation and things like that. So there are different types of talk therapy. But we don't only do therapy, we actually assess and diagnose and treat, right? So clinical psychologists do that. The psychiatrist is the one who would prescribe and manage the medication if it is indicated. And so in severe presentations, you would see that there would be a need for medication management. Oh, and if you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see there that says disconnect from the internet. And sometimes we need that. I know that we live in a world where we are so technologically dependent, and our phones are always with us. I mean, I know that I would be very lost without my calendar, because everything is on there. Even if I need to make a phone call, my reminder is on there. So I know that I myself am very lost without my phone, but there are times where you actually need to just disconnect from technology, from the internet, from everything, just to give yourself a break. Because sometimes there's a lot of also, because we live in this technological world where people have immediate access to us, we also feel very pressured that we need to respond immediately. And so sometimes you're busy during your day, and then your phone's going off, and you're wanting to respond to people, but you also have things to do. So it becomes difficult to navigate that. And simple things like that can really affect us, can affect how we then deal with it, and how we feel about ourselves, and how we deal with it. And so sometimes what you need also, just in terms of self-care, is to disconnect for an hour, put your phone on silent, put it in a drawer, and just give yourself some breathing space. And so sometimes those are the things we need to be able to be in a good enough space to deal with our challenges, our difficulties, our problems, or whatever distress we have in our life. Now, when you're looking at the behavioral activation, that is treating the symptoms of the depression, because the symptoms of the depression is your low mood, it's your loss of interest in activities and things, it's your fatigue, your energy levels, your lack of concentration, all of those things. And so when you are when you are doing the behavioral activation and increasing the activity level, it helps with those things. So if you're increasing your activity and you're putting some exercise and things like that in there, your energy levels go up, your motivation goes up, your appetite gets regulated, you're sleeping better, so you're concentrating better. So it helps with the symptoms of the depression, right? And like I said, at times when the depression is severe, you actually need the medication to do those things, right? To manage the mood and so on. But the other thing that we also have to look at is what helps or what contributes to us sometimes getting into a depression, right? So this is why it is important to analyze our thinking, because our thinking is often very much associated with how we feel. I don't want to go, I was trying to think about whether I should include this, but I thought I'll try to keep it very brief. I don't want to go too much detail and confuse people, but I want you just to take note of these three things. So we call it the ABC analysis, right? So any event that happens in our life, and when we speak about an event, we don't just mean like a function or something like that. Any event is an interaction with somebody, something that happened at work. We call those life events. And so when we feel down, when we feel depressed, we look at what has happened, what situation has happened that has led me to feeling like this. And so we call that the activating event, right? And so when we because we understand that our feelings are influenced by our thoughts, it is important to look at and be aware of and be conscious of how we think about things. And in order to figure out how we think about things, we need to do this kind of analysis, which will help us get there, right? So the A is the activating event. And you can, I always encourage to use pen and paper when you're doing these things, because it's helpful to write it down and to see it in front of you. So think of a situation, write down the activating event, just write down what happened. No judgments, no interpretations, just what happened. Perhaps I saw someone that I knew and they didn't, waved and they didn't wave back. That was just describing the event, right? So you look at the activating event and you just describe it, just simple, what happened, no interpretations, no judgments, no nothing, right? The next step is to identify the consequences, which is the C. So this looks at your feelings and your actions and behavior after the event, right? So you write down the word that best describes your feelings. What did you feel after that event? What did you do? And then what you can also do is rate those feelings, how maybe you felt really sad, or maybe you felt really down. How much, did you feel that? How intensely did you feel that? And so you write down words that describe your feelings, and then also, what did you do with those feelings, or what did you do? What did you do to make yourself feel better, and so on? Because many times in life, we have what we call unhealthy coping styles, which feed into these cycles, right? So if you think back to the depression cycle that I mentioned at the beginning, sometimes the kind of coping that we do just feeds into that depression, right? And so you want to have healthy coping styles, right? And this is what we're speaking about now. Then we look at B, which is the beliefs. So here you want to ask yourself, what was I thinking in the situation? What was my expectations? What was my perceptions? What was my attitude in the situation? What was I thinking when the situation occurred? What was going through my mind at the time? And write them all down, and write them in a list. And then you go through each statement and you underline the statement that most explains what you were thinking at the moment of that situation. And this is what we call the hot thought, right? So this hot thought is connected to the situation, because that thought that I had influenced how I felt in that situation. And if you can understand this analysis, the ABC, it gives an idea of how, in life, when there's any kind of interaction, this is happening, right? There's a situation, there's a thought about it, and there's consequences, there's a response to it, or a reaction to it rather, right? When we become more conscious and more aware of what we think in situations, and when we can think a bit, try to think differently in situations, then we can respond to a situation. But what happens typically is that we react to the situation based on how we are thinking, based on our perceptions or our expectations or our attitudes in that situation, right? And we're not always aware of it, right? This is not something that is conscious. This is not something that we take note of. This is something that just happens, right? It just happens. So we need to become more aware of it. And once we do this process where we analyze, where we write it down, we can actually become aware, become conscious of what is the kind of thinking that I have, in these situations. And then we can look at, how can, if I am thinking in a way that's not helpful in the situation, how can I think differently? So sometimes we, perhaps in a situation, for example, let's say I'm not feeling in a good space, and now I have to be at a social function. I might think to myself, I don't really want to be here. People are going to look at me. They're going to see I'm depressed. They're going to think there's something wrong with me. So these are the kind of thoughts that we have that actually then influences how we feel, right? And it then we also have expectations on ourselves, on how we expect ourselves to behave in those situations. So if I'm not feeling well, I will still expect myself to, still be able to manage myself in that situation. And because I'm putting that expectation on myself, then I again feel like I'm not coping. And so, there's just something wrong with me because I'm not even able to cope in that situation, right? So we sometimes have these expectations on ourselves. We have perceptions that, people are going to look at me, they're going to think there's something wrong with me. So this is a perception that I have, or I have an attitude that even if I'm not feeling well, even if my mood is low, I must be able to, have a smile on my face or be able to talk to people. So even that attitude that I have, that even if I'm not feeling well, I must still be able to function. That attitude that I have about what the expectation is on myself, it puts pressure on me. And because I can't perform in that way, again, it affects how I feel about it. So then obviously in all of these situations, I will end up feeling terrible because of these expectations that I have, because of these perceptions that I have, and because of this attitude that I have towards myself. And so what we want to do is we want to uncover, the kind of thinking, the beliefs. That's what we want to uncover, because the beliefs, if you see it's in the center there, there's the activating event, there's a situation, and depending on the kind of beliefs that we have and how we make sense of the situation, how we perceive the event, that will influence how we react to it, that will influence the consequences, right? And so, and obviously, if there's negative thinking and negative beliefs, we might have a negative feeling. Let's call it a negative feeling, although all emotions are just emotions. But this can lead to me going into a depression, right? And so I know it's simple yet complicated, but I just wanted you to have an overview of sometimes how, how we react to situations and how they affect us. So when we talk about unhelpful thinking styles, it's if we were to analyze the thoughts that we have. So if you think about the beliefs, and if you're looking at the thoughts, the perceptions, and all of that, we have unhelpful thinking styles, right? These are thoughts that focus on negative aspects of a situation, or overestimate the chances of a negative event happening, or placing unrealistic demands on ourselves or on others. We call them unhelpful thinking styles because they are patterns that become a habit, and they actually contribute to us feeling, to feeling negative in a situation. And so I've included some over here, because I think it's good to have a reference. This is something we call them cognitive errors, thinking errors, because and or we use the term unhelpful because when we make sense, or when we perceive through this kind of thinking, we actually end up feeling bad about ourselves. And so this is why it's unhelpful. And it involves some kind of bias in our thinking, and it's obviously a negative bias in our thinking. So when you experience an emotion like depression or anxiety, it is often preceded by some kind of unhelpful thinking, unhelpful self-statements and thoughts. And there's often a pattern to the thought. And you'll see that if you go, I'm sure if you go through this, you'll see that many of us use this. Even sometimes I have to catch myself, and I'm obviously more aware of it. But it's ways of thinking that is actually quite common that people use all the time and don't realize it, right? But they contribute to experiencing emotional distress, and so this is why it's important to be conscious of it. So the first one, I'm just going to go quickly. The first one is called mental filter. So this is when we filter certain information. So it's like a filtering out process, almost like a tunnel vision, where we focus only on one part of a situation and we ignore the rest. And so usually this means that we focus on the negative parts of a situation and we ignore the whole picture, right? Because we only focus on the negative. An example of this might be, let's say I wrote an exam, and there were 5 papers, and out of the 5 papers, I had a low mark for 1. So I will end up focusing on the one paper that I had a low mark, and I'll tell myself, oh, I got a low mark for this, I'm so stupid. Yet I had high marks for all of the rest of the papers. The rest of the 4 papers, I've got a very good, very high marks, and this one paper, I had a low mark, but I'll tell myself I'm stupid because I'm focusing only on that one paper where I received the low mark, right? Without looking at what else could have happened with that paper, all I see is that I got a low mark, and that means I'm stupid, right? So that is called mental filter, when we're focusing only on the negative. The other one is called jumping to conclusions, and we often do this. It's a habit, that many of us are guilty of. We assume we know what someone else is thinking, or we make predictions about what's going to happen. So let's say I'm at a social function. I tell myself, oh, they're not going to like me, they're going to think I'm weird, no one's going to talk to me. Or I go to a function thinking, I know I'm not going to enjoy this. I know it's just going to, it's going to be a challenging evening, and I'm not going to enjoy it. Right? So before I even go to the function, I'm already telling myself this. And of course, if I'm thinking that and I'm predicting that, I go into the situation with those kind of thoughts and already those kind of feelings. And so again, I actually focus on the things that will prove me right? That no one likes me, or that I'm not going to enjoy, or that I'm going to have a difficult time. Right? And so when we have those kind of thoughts, it does influence then how we engage in that situation. So let's say I have to do a presentation at work. I tell myself, oh, people's not going to understand me. They're not going to know what I'm saying. They're going to think I'm not speaking very well. And I'm going to be a failure at this. And so when I talk, I become so worried about it that I actually I don't do a good job. And so I in my mind, prove myself right. But the way I think about it, it affects how I enter into that situation. Right, so that's jumping to conclusions. And then personalization, it involves blaming myself or blaming others for that matter about something, everything that goes wrong or could go wrong or anything that's going to happen, anything negative, I blame myself. So let's say the example I used earlier, if I'm walking, down the street and I see someone I know and I wave to them and they don't wave back, I tell myself, I must have done something wrong. That's why they're not waving back to me. I don't think about any other reason besides that it must be my fault. So personalization is when I think that things are my fault, even when it's not. Right? And so because I think it's my fault, I hold myself responsible for that. Catastrophizing is when if we think about blowing things out of proportion. So we view a situation as terrible, as so bad, even though the problem is quite small. So again, let's say I have to, what example can we use here by catastrophizing? Let's say I have to prepare for a presentation, but I've run out of paper and so I can't print out my talk, right? So I might blow that in such a big deal and say, oh, this is such a problem now, because now I can't have my notes, printed. But because I'm thinking of it as such a big problem, I find it difficult then to figure out a solution for that, right? And so this is the other thing about these unhelpful thinking. It almost blocks your thinking for anything further than how you've made sense of it. So it's very negative. We call it negatively biased interpretation, because my whole interpretation of the situation is negative, but it then blocks me from being able to think broader and thinking in a different way about it, right? Black and white thinking, we also call this tunnel vision, where you only see things in black and white, one extreme or the other extreme. There's no in between, right? So you're either wrong or right. You're either good or bad. There's nothing in between, and there's no shades of gray. And of course, life is not like this. Often it's not black and white, right? Shoulding and musting, sometimes we'll tell ourselves, I should know this. I should know how to do this. And this means that I'm putting a demand on myself, right? I'm putting a judgment on myself that I had to perform in a certain way, or I had to behave in a certain way, right? And so when I have that judgment or that expectation of myself and I don't perform in that way, I can feel really down about it, because now I'm actually saying that I behaved under par. I should have known better, So I'm saying that I didn't behave up to standard. There was something wrong with the way I behaved in that situation. And so, of course, that will, it creates unrealistic expectations, but also, again, it affects how I feel about myself, because now I feel down, like, I didn't behave like I should have. What's wrong with me? Is something wrong with me? So again, this creates an unrealistic expectation, which affects how I feel about myself in that situation. Overgeneralization. When we overgeneralize, we take one instance and we impose it on everything. So we say, I always do poorly, or I always get this wrong. Maybe I got it wrong once or twice, but now I'm saying, this always happens to me. And so then again, I'm looking at things in that way, that it will always be like that. It will always be negative for me. I'll never get it right. Something wrong with me. Emotional reasoning. I feel it, therefore it's true, so it involves a way of thinking based on how I feel. So if I feel anxious about something, then something bad is definitely going to happen. So I base how I think about things, or how I see things, based on how I feel. Magnification and minimization. In this thinking style, we magnify the positive attributes of other people and minimize ours, but we maximize our mistakes and minimize others' mistakes. All right. So someone perhaps is, treats me badly, but then I say, they didn't know, they don't know any better, whatever. So I make excuses for them. But when I make a mistake, then I think very badly of myself that, I made this mistake, this it's such a big issue that I made this mistake. So I have consideration for others, but I don't have consideration for myself. And these thinking patterns, they often contribute to us feeling badly about ourselves and thinking badly about ourselves, which again could affect how we feel about ourselves. So these are thinking styles that can contribute to us going into a depressive cycle. So we spoke about behavioral activation, we spoke about coping skills, and what is important for us to remember is that there are also things that we can put in our life that can help us be proactive about managing our stress and our distress, and that is staying healthy. So we speak about the balanced routine, and I know this is very difficult. I mean, I know when I say this to other people, I'm firstly saying it to myself, that it's important to make sure that we have a balanced routine. You need to, as you give attention to your work, you have to give attention to your family, you have to give attention to yourself, you have to give attention to your spouse, and you have to give attention to your creator. So you need to find a way to balance that. And when you are feeling distressed and when you are feeling, really down and so on, sometimes it's because that balance is out of sync. So we don't always get it right, but we must try to be conscious about it and be continuously trying to get it right, as much as we can get it right. So sometimes, you have a busy week and you can't help with the busy week. But if you know you had a busy week this week, try to ease your schedule in the following week. If you know that you didn't have much time to connect with your family or your children or your partner because you had a busy week, then try to make time for it next week. So I think just being conscious about it. We don't always get it right, but if we are conscious about it, we will make effort to try and do things that can help us towards finding that balance, right? So when we have a chaotic or busy life, then the balance helps us to, to manage the challenges and things. It gives us the I want to say the oomph to actually manage the challenges that comes with that kind of busy lifestyle. So this means you must, when you speak about balance, routine or lifestyle, it means you must eat well. I know that we don't all eat healthy all the time, but again, to try to, eat whole foods, eat healthy foods. And when we speak about healthy foods, we mean, like you're having all the different food groups and things like that, not living off takeaways, because though, again, that is something that can affect, our mood and how we deal with things, right? Sleep well. Again, we don't always have the luxury of sleeping that 8 to 10 hours at night, but we must try to work towards that. And if we know that we had a busy week this week, try to get some rest next week, right? So try to sleep well. And it's not just about getting enough sleep, it's about getting enough quality sleep. So if you are someone that finds yourself waking up a lot during the night or having restless sleep, again, try to seek treatment for that, because you need to have good quality sleep. When we have quality sleep, our organs and everything gets what they need, and so that we can face the next day. Right? Then exercise. I say exercise, but it incorporates all kinds of movement. It's really just about having movement in your life. You don't have to run, you don't have to walk, you can find something that works for you. If you like aerobics, do that. If you like yoga, do that. If you like boxing, do that. Whatever it is that you like, you do that, but try to incorporate some kind of activity where there is movement, because again, this is good for the body. It releases the good hormones, and that hormones help us again to manage the challenges that we have in our life. And then, of course, social connections, friends, family. Depending on what kind of relationships you have with your family, sometimes you're close to a sibling or a cousin or somebody that you have, in your life that you can, talk to if you need to, if you have need just a space to vent. We don't always have, we're not always in a situation where it's a diagnosable condition and we need to have professional treatment. Sometimes we're just having a difficult time or going through a challenging time, and sometimes just having a space where we can vent or feel supported, or think things through, it helps. So, try to have people in your life that you feel close to, that you trust, that you can have a space where you can, if you need to offload, that you can offload. But of course, not so much so that you impose or impact on the other person. It has to, it has to be someone who is able to also to listen and to give that space to you. And then if it is that you have a diagnosed mental health condition, then, find a professional support network. And this includes, GPs, it includes mental health practitioners. So you do find GPs who are psychologized, who are aware and who know how to manage mental health. They will often refer you to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Other mental health practitioners are registered counselors. Of course, there are other disciplines beyond this. There's different kinds of therapists that you find, but if it is a diagnosable condition, then please do seek professional treatment, a professional support network that can work and help you, get the treatment that you need for whatever it is that you are experiencing. That part is very important. And then lastly, it's important to have a realistic attitude. When we look, sometimes we have habits that are not helpful. We have coping skills that are not healthy. And when we're in this process of trying to change and trying to shift and to do things differently, you must expect mistakes, and you must expect that you'll sometimes default to old patterns. And this is fine as long as you are conscious and you are aware of it. And each time there's a mistake or a default that it's a motivation to work again and to continue working towards thinking differently and doing differently. Expect some down days. We are human. Emotions are just that, emotions, right? There is actually no positive and negative emotions. When we speak about depression or that, it's a low mood, it's a down, it's a down feeling, but we don't have negative emotions. Life is filled with grief, with joy, with all sorts of things. And emotions are temporary. They move. And so sometimes we feel sad, sometimes we feel down, but it's important to just feel that and then, and then move on. It is when we get stuck in that we sometimes need help getting out of it. But for the most part, if you have a down day, don't beat yourself up about it. Sometimes those down days, sometimes when we feel that, it's just also our body communicating to us that something's happening for us, and so we need to take a look at it. But we are human and we experience in a day of emotions. This is normal. So don't feel bad about it. Don't beat yourself up if you do have a down day here and there. Because sometimes you're tired, you're exhausted, you have a busy schedule, and your body is just tired, and so you need just to recuperate. The important thing is to notice when we do feel that way, so that we can address it in the appropriate way. So if I'm feeling really tired, I need to get some rest, right? If I've been so busy and, I've been busy with a lot of people, I need to just take a break, switch off, and just, have some time for myself. So depending on what's happening, we need to look at that and then see what we need to do in order to manage that. Challenging the negative thinking, the unhelpful thinking styles we spoke about, right? So try to identify them. I'm going to send the slides again so you can have it. You can get familiar with it so that you can try and identify it and notice when you do think that way and kind of challenge yourself to think differently. Avoid thinking traps. If I default or I make a mistake, it doesn't mean I'm back at square one, because even that thought, saying that I'm back at square one, I've lost all the progress, that kind of attitude, again, it's not going to help me. It's actually, I might feel worse about it. It might take me back into a spiral because I'm seeing a mistake or a default as me going back to square one and me not making progress. So also the perception and the attitude that we have is very important. And lastly, see challenges as opportunities to learn new ways of dealing with stress and distress, right? So sometimes we have a challenge, we have a problem, and sometimes we have ways in which we dealt with problems before and they help us, but sometimes they don't. And so we have to figure out new ways of doing things, right? And so when we have a challenge, when there's a problem, sometimes it's just an opportunity for us to learn a new way of problem solving, a new way of coping, a new way of dealing with our stresses and so on. I'm going to stop there. Let me check if there's any questions. I know I took up a lot of time with this presentation, but I wanted to just explain as much as I could, because I think it's important to understand, the coping and the regulating part, as important as it is to understand what depression is all about. I don't see any questions, and I know that we are, obviously there's only a few people in the live presentation because of the change in time. Let's check. Does anyone have any questions for what I spoke about this evening? Okay, I don't see any questions. So as I mentioned, for those of you who are watching the recording, if there are any questions after watching this presentation, please do forward it to Muslims Connected, and I will try and answer the questions in some form. I'll try and answer the questions and get it to you. I will be, as per usual, sending the slides to Muslims Connected to share it with everyone who's participating in the course, just for references. And on one of them, I think my email address is if there's any questions further than that, you feel free to email me. I do sometimes take a bit long to reply, but I do get to it. And if there's anyone, I know I've been receiving a couple of requests for people looking for a Muslim therapist. At the moment, I am full, but I do belong to a network. And so when I can't help someone, I do refer them to one of my colleagues. And so I'd be happy to do that for you if there's a need for that. I know there isn't a directory or anything like that where you can see how to access Muslim therapists. But if you do make contact with me, I can try and refer you. A copy of the PowerPoint, I'll send it to Muslims Connected, who will share it in the group. If you are not in the group, in the WhatsApp group, then please do make contact with Masood and let him know so that we can try and get the copy to you. So I'm not sure I understand the question when you ask if it's from outside South Africa. The therapy network, the Muslim professionals, it's okay. It's within South Africa. So obviously I'm in Cape Town, so I have a network in Cape Town, but I do have a colleague who's connected to the network in Johannesburg. If you do need a therapist beyond that, please contact me and let me know where you are. I do belong to a network in the States as well, and I belong to an international group. So if you are somewhere else, I could try and assist you. In the UK, okay, you can make contact with me and then I'll try and assist you. If you are looking for a Muslim professional, then I can try and assist you with that. Please email me. You'll find my email address on, I think it was the second, yeah, that's the right email address, yes. All right. Are there any other questions? Okay, I don't think there's any other questions. Yeah, so I think we'll stop there. Okay. Looks like there's one more. Okay. Allah khairul jaza. You're welcome. I hope that these presentations that my colleague and I have been doing for the last couple of weeks, I hope they've been beneficial, inshallah. I hope they've been useful. You have the slides. I know they're not as detailed, but there is the recording also of the presentation. So please, for reference, you can always go back to it. Do share what we've shared here. Please continue sharing. I think, the one thing is that there's a lot of stigma with mental health. And so we're trying to really, break the stigma through education. And this is the purpose of this. And of course, October being Mental Health Awareness Month, we thought it appropriate to look at one of the most common mental health conditions, which is depression. Shukran for that, Suada. I'm really glad that it was useful. So yeah, and I think education goes a long way also in prevention. And so this is the idea of what we've been sharing with you guys. So I know we haven't shared a lot, but we've tried to share as much as we can, just enough to understand and to hopefully help with prevention. But also if you know of anyone who is experiencing depression or any other mental health condition for that matter, that you are able to to offer support and help them find the right treatment and so on. With that, I'm going to conclude. Shukran so much for your participation over the 4 weeks. I leave you in the protection of Allah. Keep well. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.